The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong to the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
All right, well, friends, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you literally enduring till the very end. I recognize that it is now very, very late. In fact, past my bedtime. This is usually the time when I'm starting to doze off during my shows. But in any case, thank you for being here. I am very excited to be with you for one final hour today, where I'm now beginning the second of these two series. Just a quick introduction if you're just joining us. My name is Dr. Matthew Gray, professor of ancient scripture at Brigham Young University. And in this series, I'm going to continue the theme of studying New Testament scripture in its historical context. But now I want to shift over to another favorite book of mine, the book of Revelation. This is a series that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. Usually I do something with archaeology and something with the early Jewish setting of the New Testament. But I really, truly love teaching the book of Revelation to classes at BYU. And so I thought that because of where we are in the Come Follow Me cycle right now, that we're starting that second half of the New Testament, I thought it'd be really fun just to have a whole series on 1 Corinthians and kind of social history within early Christianity. But then let's just do it. Let's have a fun conversation about the book of Revelation. It's a book that we don't talk about a lot, but clearly a book that is just full of fascination and mystery and intrigue. And I know that every one of us have had, like late night missionary apartment conversations about this book. And I mean, this is a great text to look at. So I thought that we'd take a whole series and just look at the book of Revelation. But again, based on, my background, my training, and just kind of my own wiring, I guess. I always tend to look at things as a historian. I am a believing Latter-day Saint. I am 100% all in on faith in Jesus and faith in the restored church. And I also love seeing things in their historical context. So in this series, I want to look at the book of Revelation from that historical perspective. So I wanted to mention this right up front because it's probably wise to note what this series is not going to be. Okay, I have a lot of friends and colleagues who have very different approaches to the book of Revelation. I noticed that on the schedule for this week, it looked like there are no fewer than 5 classes on the book of Revelation and I'm sure everyone has wonderful, enriching perspectives. So I would encourage you to look at those different perspectives. What this particular series is not going to be, though, it's not going to be how the book of Revelation prepares us for the political events of our time, or how the book of Revelation prepares us for global calamities that are right around the corner. The reality is, I actually have no clue on any of those things. Okay, I am not a very good prophet, but I'm an okay historian. And so what I felt that I would do here is, rather than look at the book of Revelation the way we often do, and I'm not trying to discredit those approaches, by looking at it as some kind of blueprint for the global political crises that are right around our corner, or maybe already here, depending on your personal perspective. Instead, I'm actually going to bracket all of that out. So if that's kind of your thing, I'm so sorry if that's disappointing. What I want to do, though, is instead turn our gaze backwards and ask, what did this book sound like to its original first century audience? And so when I say I wanted to look at the book of Revelation in its historical context, I thought it was kind of clever, the historical context of the apocalypse. What I meant by that is I want to read this book with its first century readers. Okay, so I just want to clarify that right up front, what this section or this series is going to be and what it's not going to be. Again, that's not to dismiss other perspectives, but it is to say, I think that a historically informed reading of the book of Revelation is totally worth our time. And I'm going to try to convince you of that here in the next 4 class periods as we look at the book of Revelation in its first century setting. Okay, so fair enough. Are we good on that? I am so sorry if I don't have the answers on microchips or virus vaccines. No clue. I'm just not that guy. That's all way above my pay grade. but I do know something about Jews in the Roman world. So let's take a look from that perspective. Okay, so the book of Revelation, man, what a fascinating text. I am just curious, by show of hands, who's actually tried to work through this thing? All right, this is good for you. That's amazing. The book of Revelation, as you mostly know, is one of the wildest books of Scripture. From chapter 1 through chapter 22, it is a wild ride that you just have to buckle up and enjoy. We are talking about a book that is so bizarre in its symbolism, so wild in its kind of its messaging and the pictures, the portraits that it's painting for us, that sometimes as modern readers, we honestly just have no clue what to do with this thing, right? I mean, think about this book, right? In the opening chapters, the author sees a window open up in the sky, and he's taken through that window where he suddenly finds himself in the heavenly temple. He sees God sitting on his throne, surrounded by beasts and elders, and they're singing hymns, and there's a sea of glass, and there's rainbows, and there's hanging incense lamps. And I mean, it is a wild scene, a kind of a cacophony of praise and creatures and liturgy in the heavenly throne room. And then at some point, he sees a slain lamb who is standing there living, as if he had been slain, 7 horns and 7 eyes, with a slit throat and blood dripping down its wool. But the thing's still walking around. And eventually then he sees a scroll sealed with 7 seals, and he hands it to the lamb, who somehow takes it. I'm not sure how a lamb takes the scroll and opens it without opposable thumbs, but somehow the lamb takes the scroll and one by one takes off the seals, and the scroll starts unfolding. And as the scroll unfolds, all of a sudden, plagues and creatures start jumping out. We get the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? These 4 riders, death and conquest and plague and famine. And all of a sudden, plagues just are pouring out on the earth. We're talking, bottomless pits of locusts and frogs and hail and light. I mean, you name it, right? Well, then we're only now into chapter 11. Because then halfway through the book, we kind of shift over to a whole new set of images and pictures of beasts and dragons and an antichrist figure. At some point, we hear angelic trumpets sound through the heavens, and bowls of wrath replicating the plagues are poured out upon the earth. There's a massive battle called the Battle of Armageddon, at the end of which a new Jerusalem comes out of the sky as a 4-square cube, coming down, landing on the earth, and turning the earth into literally a new creation. And all things are made new heavens and new earth. What a book, right? I mean, this is amazing. Thank you. Okay, there it is. The book of Revelation in 90 seconds with Matt Gray. All right, okay. What else do we need to say? That's it. All right, that literally actually was the whole book. Okay, so what a fun survey, right? So what do we do with this thing? I mean, it is so bizarre. This collage of images are so unique that for centuries, literally 2,000 years, readers have been asking the question, what the heck does all this mean, right? What are we supposed to do with this? That is a really good question. And the reality is, I think, that it's not entirely unanswerable. I've already said that from my perspective, I tend not to read the book of Revelation as a blueprint for coming global political crises. Maybe that's a fruitful approach. Maybe you thoroughly enjoy it. That's wonderful. But I do think that there is a way to grasp the basics of what this book is, and that is precisely by looking backwards and trying to understand it not as necessarily a blueprint for the 21st century, but instead as something that actually meant something that actually had meaning for its originally intended audience of believers in Jesus in the 1st century Roman world. So what I want to do is try to offer that perspective, and hopefully it's also an encouraging perspective that you can actually say something about this book with reasonable certainty. Okay, and I think that reasonable certainty comes by looking at it as in its historical setting first. And after you come to terms with that, then if you find other readings more interesting and more plausible, fine. Just as long as we're self-aware, starting with, do we understand what this would have looked like in the 1st century? So with this series, I want to try to give a historical perspective on the book. And in this opening lecture of this 4-part series, I want to try to give some background perspectives that kind of set the stage for reading it in its historical context. Some of you may have already heard, some of it may be new, some of it you may disagree with, and that's totally fine. We're just friends here tonight having a conversation about a very fascinating text. I'm not claiming to have all the answers, but I do think that a historical perspective is a compelling one. So the first thing that I want to do tonight is I want to first note that there are, in fact, multiple ways of interpreting this book. If you have grown up assuming that there's only one correct way, that's not the case. There have actually, over the centuries, been many different ways that you could read this book. I think that's important to note. It kind of helps situate your own reading. It helps you to be more self-aware as a reader, so you kind of see where you are on the interpretive landscape. So I do want to take a look at different interpretations of the book. Okay. I then want to look at the genre of the book, how understanding its literary form from a first century Jewish perspective itself can be extremely helpful in making sense of this book. And then finally today, I want to look, number 3, at simply the historical setting. Where was this book written? To whom? What was its main message? And I hope that together, those 3 kind of subtopics will prepare us to start reading the actual book through the lens of first century believers, starting tomorrow, Thursday, and then concluding on Friday. Okay, does that sound like a good plan? All right, if you're not convinced yet, stick around. Let's see if anything becomes interesting to you. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the idea that there are, in fact, different ways you could interpret this book. Sometimes we have this kind of false sense that there is only one correct way. As far as I know, I don't think the church has ever put out the one correct way to read this book in its entirety. I think there's a lot of cultural assumptions. There's a lot of different things that we all bring to it, maybe that we've absorbed from other communities. I just don't know if there's ever been a revealed document that takes you through Revelation 1 through Revelation 22. Instead, if we go back to the very beginning, we will notice that various interpretive approaches have been applied to this book for many centuries. Let's go and start from the very beginning. And this is going to be a very brief history of interpretation of the book. Just to give you a sense, every slide could have 20 sub-slides to show you the complexity of this. So I'm not trying to say that this is not complex. It is. But generally speaking, here are some of the trends of interpretation for the last 2,000 years. Let's go back to early Christianity. How were early Christians reading this book? And on this slide, what I mean by early Christians is Christians of the 1st through, let's say, 3rd century, when Christianity was a social, religious minority group in the larger Roman world. They never easily fit in, and they constantly feel a tension with the Roman world around them. How did those earliest Christians view the book of Revelation? Well, that interpretation, that interpretive approach to the book is today a category that we sometimes refer to as what's called preterism. Preterism is itself a very loaded and complex term. Don't have time to get into all the details, but generally speaking, the idea of this interpretive approach that the earliest Christians had was that the book of Revelation was effectively a message of hope for contemporary believers, meaning we were not on their radar at all. Like, you're not going to talk to a Christian in the entire Roman world who even conceives of us still being here on the western side of the planet in the 21st century. As far as they're concerned, the book of Revelation is a message of hope to contemporary 1st, 2nd, or 3rd century believers that, yes, they are being persecuted right now, marginalized right now in their Roman context, in their surrounding Roman world, but that ultimately this book is encouraging them to continue living as faithful Christian disciples in a hostile cultural environment called the Roman Empire. And it's a message of hope to hang on in your Christian discipleship, because one day, maybe even one day soon, the Roman Empire, Babylon, the whore on the 7 mountains, the Antichrist, the 666, the Nero, the persecutor of Christians, one day that's going to come crashing down, and God's imminent victory will replace it. The kingdom of God will displace the Babylonian worldly Roman Empire, and the kingdom of God will triumph at the return of Jesus. It was a message of hope that had to do with their own world, their own hopes for the future, their own hopes for deliverance and relief and enduring in Christian discipleship. And that reading of the book really did make sense for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries, when Christians were a persecuted minority group in a Roman world who often viewed them with hostility. By the 4th century, though, when Christianity now becomes literally the state-sponsored imperial religion, that message doesn't as easily apply, or it doesn't feel as easily relevant. And so what we find is that in late antiquity, and again, I'm oversimplifying, just giving you the big picture, but generally speaking, in late antiquity, the 4th, 5th, 6th century into the early Middle Ages, we then shift into an interpretive mode where we're not viewing these as future historical events at all, but it's just what we sometimes call an idealist approach to the book of Revelation. It's simply a symbolic portrayal of the timeless conflict of good versus evil, God versus Satan, angels versus demons, and it's a timeless message that God will ultimately overcome Satan, right? You can kind of feel how that more symbolic approach to the book of Revelation, that more what we call an idealist approach to the book of Revelation, would make sense in a world where Christians are in fact now the dominant political power. We're no longer waiting for Rome to fall. We are Rome, right? So why would we expect that to happen when so this book must just be a symbolic presentation of the conflict of good and evil. It's not connected to any historical moment in the past, present, or the future. And throughout late antique, early medieval Christianity, that's a fairly common way to read the book and to comment on the book. Things then become very interesting during the Reformation, because during the Reformation, we now have Christian groups called reformers, right? Martin Luther, his followers, Tyndale, Wycliffe, his followers, who now themselves are Christians, but they're now a persecuted minority group of Christians within a larger Catholic Christian world. For those reformers of the 15th and 16th centuries in particular, they offered a new read, a fresh read of the book of Revelation, a new interpretive approach that today we often call historicism. Okay, a historicist approach to the book of Revelation, which was very popular among the early reformers, said, no. It's not a symbolic portrayal of just generally good versus evil. The book of Revelation, says the historicist readers, it's a survey, a prophetic survey of the entirety of Christian history. So you can take the symbols of the book of Revelation, starting with the 1st century, and the symbols tell you a story all the way through the triumphal end. And in that reformer, historicist interpretation of the book, and we're talking it goes all the way through, the Byzantine Empire, the Crusades, who ends up being the bad guy? Who ends up being the beast, Babylon, in this tradition? It's the Catholic Church. Who's the Antichrist? Well, it's the Pope. Who's the persecuted minority group who God will one day save? It's the reformers, right? So it's a survey, a prophetic survey of all of Christian history, showing that one day the oppressive Catholic Church, from the Protestant perspective, will fall. The Antichrist Pope will be dislodged. And when Jesus comes again, the Reformation will reach God's ultimate triumph on the earth. Well, this particular perspective is a fascinating one, and actually not well used today. It's not often used today. I think today, even though early reformers were the ones who really got this approach going, I think today the only Protestant groups that still really maintain this type of approach are the Seventh-day Adventists. So if you wonderful people, love the Adventist community, I think that they still maintain a historicist reading of the book of Revelation. But this interpretive model is a reminder that anytime you come across anti-Catholic rhetoric connected to the book of Revelation, this is it. It comes from either the early reformers or maybe a modern Seventh-day Adventist commentary who's maintained this perspective. Babylon's the Catholic Church, the Antichrist is the Pope, and the Reformation represents the ultimate triumph of God on the earth. Okay, so interesting historical moment, didn't have a lot of staying power. Well, as you can imagine, if you're a Catholic reader in the 15th or 16th century, and you're coming across these Protestant interpretations, these Protestant rereadings of the book of Revelation as a prophetic survey of Christian history in which you, the Catholics, are the bad guys, you're probably not a huge fan of that interpretive model. And so it's actually Catholic thinkers, Catholic commentators that develop a counter interpretation that we're now going to call futurism. Okay, a futurist approach to the book of Revelation, initially developed by Catholic commentators in response to reformer historicism, is that, Catholic Church isn't the Antichrist, we're not the beast, the Pope's not the Antichrist. The book of Revelation must be a prophetic blueprint of future events. It's some future evil kingdom. Some future evil entity is going to be terrible and going to be oppressive, and some future evil empire is going to be destroyed by a future coming of Jesus. It's not us. Okay, so that's a Catholic response in the 16th and 17th century called futurism. Well, for the most part, Catholic futurism died down as well, but received a remarkable and completely unexpected revival of enthusiasm by modern evangelicals. Starting in the years after the American Civil War, So we're talking late 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. New waves of now evangelical futurist approaches began to emerge and became wildly popular among cultural evangelical Christians in the West, Europe and America in particular. So modern evangelical perspectives on the book of Revelation, which have been developing since the late 19th century, is still a futurist read, meaning it's not about the first century. That was a preterist read. It's not a historicist approach. That was the early reformers read. Only Adventists kind of hang on to that now. Instead, the book of Revelation is still a blueprint, a prophetic blueprint of end times events, some future things. Horrible things are going to happen, and they're right around the corner. Some terrible empire is going to show up. Some terrible kingdom is going to arise. And man, if you're living through those days, it's going to be terrible. And one day Jesus is going to come and save you all, which is going to be great, right? And so that's how it's going to work. So that's where it is today. Modern Christian media tends today to be very futuristic in their reading of the book of Revelation, as shown by wildly popular media, such as in the 80s, you might remember Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth. Right, it was a nationwide bestseller for a lot of years in the 80s, all about how the book of Revelation was a symbolic blueprint for events that were coming right down the road. It was the Russians, it was the nuclear holocaust, it was the, and then list all of the political and social anxieties of the 1980s. That's what it's about. And one day soon, God's going to save us from all that. The 1990s iteration of evangelical futurism, of course, is the Left Behind series. Let's totally admit, who read the Left Behind? Go ahead. Really, that's all? I don't think you're telling the truth. I think the more of you read that. Okay, I read it. I loved it. It was great. And I watched the Kirk Cameron movies and everything. The Nicolas Cage movie was truly terrible. But the Kirk Cameron movies, man, they're a lot of fun. Okay, but the Left Behind series was all about this, right? It was all about how the book of Revelation, again, it's a prophetic blueprint for future events. But that's a future that's right around the corner, so close, in fact, that you can already start reading the bizarre symbols of the book of Revelation into the global political crisis that you see as most threatening. And that futurist approach, that futurist interpretation of the book of Revelation has dominated certainly American Christian thought for the last 100 years. Okay. The only thing that's fascinating, though, about it is that every generation of evangelical or evangelical adjacent readers of the book of Revelation who have this futurist view of the book, they have one thing in common, and that is that every decade they have to completely rewrite their interpretation of it because it doesn't quite happen the way you think. In the 1940s or 1930s, it was crystal clear from a futurist read that the book of Revelation was all about the rise of the Axis powers. I mean, it was so clear now, right, that Babylon, the prostitute, the Antichrist, we're talking about Hitler, we're talking about Mussolini. But then World War II ended, and the world kind of kept going. But then the Cold War brought a whole new set of global anxieties. And well, now it's really clear. That's what the book of Revelation is talking about. It's talking about the Cold War. It's the Russians. It's the communists. It's a nuclear holocaust. And the locusts coming out of the pit, they must be Apache helicopter. I mean, it's that kind of stuff, right? But then the Berlin Wall came down, and the Cold War kind of warmed up, right? What's the metaphor? Anyway, Cold War kind of shifted, right? But in the early 2000s, I remember this well. I was a BYU student. The two towers come down in New York City. It was crystal clear in a futurist read of the book of Revelation in the early 2000s that what we were really talking about is actually the rise of global Islamic terrorism, right? And so people like Osama bin Laden, I mean, they clearly fit the bill of who these beasts are in the book of Revelation. And by the mid 2000s, 2010s. At this point, it's basically any political figure you just don't like, right? It's like, it's Barack Obama's the Antichrist. No, it's George W. Bush is the Antichrist. I mean, now we're at a point where literally, if you think anything other than what I think, you must be the Antichrist, right? I mean, like, we're just kind of in that moment right now, right? Does it feel that way? It kind of feels that way. All right. So in other words, it's this futurist reading of the book of Revelation that has led to a lot of revelation anxiety, right? That, man, I don't know what the heck this means, but man, it's going to be bad, right? There's going to be a zombie apocalypse. We're talking nuclear holocaust. We're talking whatever disasters right around it must be that. Now, I know we're having fun. I'm not trying to be dismissive. I obviously, personally, am not overly convinced by this interpretation, but I do want to read, surely people, there's a reason why a lot of people really, really like this reading. It's very intriguing. It's very compelling. It feels very, I'll say it's very compelling. It feels very relevant, right? But the reality is there's a lot of revelation anxiety that comes from this futuristic model, and it always needs to be rewritten because it never quite happens the way the author of the 80s or the author of the 90s says it's supposed to happen. That's one of the challenges with a futurist read of the book. I could not help myself. I had to include this wonderful cartoon, a little preterist humor for you there, as we're all nervous about whatever global pandemics or vaccines or global community, whatever it is you think are the bad guys, right? Here's this dude walking around in a biblical robe. Relax, man. It all happened in 70. Little futurist humor there. Okay. So anyway, in other words, this brief survey, and it's very complex, but this brief survey, I hope, has introduced you to interpretive categories that have been applied to the book of Revelation, interpretive lenses that have been used to read this book for the last 2,000 years. In short, there is not one interpretation of this book. There are many interpretations of this book. Okay? They all have their strengths. They all have their limitations. Do you see it as only relevant to the ancient past, as a preterist would? Do you see it as a survey of all of Christian history, culminating in the Reformation, like early reformers would? Do you see it as a futurist, a prophetic prediction of some kind of future event, as modern evangelicals would? Well, these are some of the options. The reality is, scholarship has been aware of all these options for a very long time. I am not necessarily saying you need to get these books, but I am saying that these two volumes that I'm highlighting here are interesting reflections of the fact that scholars often put these interpretive models into conversation. It's very common. I think of a couple examples of Revelation 4 views, where you literally put the preterist, idealist, historicist, and futurist interpretations side by side by different commentators to actually see all the different interpretive options that are available to you as you're reading this book. So this is all just a way to remind you that, kind of settle down a little bit, settle in, and inform yourself of the larger conversations and see what's out there in terms of interpretive possibilities, and at least be self-aware with how you are personally reading the book. I hope that's fair enough. Now, I know that many of you are asking, well, what about, isn't there a Latter-day Saint perspective? I mean, where would the Latter-day Saints fall in those categories? And I think the surprising answer, at least from my perspective, and again, maybe you disagree, and that's totally fine. We're all friends just having a conversation here. I think from my perspective, the answer is not really. I don't think we easily fit into any of those. There is no revealed section of the Doctrine and Covenants that walks us through an authoritative Latter-day Saint interpretation of Revelation 1 through 22. We just don't have anything like that. Instead, if you scour Joseph Smith's teachings, and we actually have a Joseph Smith expert in the room today. I won't call him out by name, but good to see you, Mark. What you'll notice is that Joseph Smith himself was a little bit eclectic in the way he read the book of Revelation. He did give a few comments and kind of occasionally worked in book of Revelation imagery to his various revelations and translations, but there was never really a systematic commentary. He just never gave us that. In fact, Joseph Smith seemed to kind of develop in his interests in the book of Revelation over time. His earliest kind of channeling of book of Revelation imagery, Book of Mormon translation, 1829, kind of sounds a little bit idealist. Yeah, there's good guys, there's bad guys, and eventually God's going to win. Just bad church, Church of the Lamb, Church of the Lamb's going to win. Pretty kind of idealist sounding. In some of the early revelations, there does seem to be a little futurism there. Yeah, terrible things are going to happen in the near future. Section 77, for just like 2 or 3 verses, starts to flirt with historicism just a little bit, just enough to say, all right, I'm done. It's like, well, wait a second, what does that mean, right? And then finally, by the time he ends his career in Nauvoo in the late 1830s, early 1840s, he is giving discourses on the book of Revelation. You know what he's not interested in those discourses is the book of Revelation's prophetic prowess. What is he interested in? He is interested in all of the cool temple imagery that's found in the book of Revelation. It's almost like he's just mining the book of Revelation for cool temple images, right? New names, white robes, kings and priests, stuff that we're going to talk about tomorrow and the next day. It's like he's just mining this book for the cool temple images that it provides. And that seems to be his final interest in the book. Right. So he never did leave us a manual. Right. He just didn't. He left us little snippets, just enough to say he had some interest in the book, clearly. But at the end of the day, we do not have, I don't think, maybe you disagree, that's fine. I don't think that we have any kind of authoritative, systematic Latter-day Saint read that we're bound to. I think we're just being encouraged to be smart readers of the book, right? And go do our homework and find what resonates with us until maybe one day we'll get something like that, but I don't see it anytime soon. So having said that, there's some wonderful scholarship that's been available for many years about Latter-day Saints and kind of an apocalyptic worldview, their engagement with the book of Revelation. Years ago, Grant Underwood wrote the book, The Millenarian World of Early Mormonism, a lot of kind of engagement with the book of Revelation by Latter-day Saints in that book. And then Chris Blythe recently published a book with Oxford University Press called The Latter-day Saints and the American Apocalypse. Again, kind of surveying and studying various Latter-day Saint engagements with the book of Revelation over the history of the Restoration. Okay, so with that then, I hope that was a helpful overview of different interpretive models. I hope that's all calmed some of the anxieties. There's several options on the table. Think through them. Find what's most compelling to you, and at the very least, be self-aware as you read the book of Revelation. Are you a futurist? Then say so, and tell us why. Right? Are you a historicist? Say so, and tell us why. Right? Kind of think through how we read the book, where we stand as we read the text. Okay, so that being the case, that's all preface. The next thing that I want to do is I now want to shift over to, again, kind of a historical reading of the book. All those options are fascinating and totally on the table, and I encourage you to pursue what you find the most interesting. As a historian, though, the question that I personally find most interesting is, okay, despite all of those options, what did it mean to those guys? What did it mean to the actual author and the actual first century audience that it was written to, like by name? You'll notice the book does not start off saying, to you of the last days in Western America, 21st century, beware of the one world government. It doesn't say any of that kind of stuff, right? It says, to you of the 7 churches of Asia Minor, I am writing a message to you. So I think it matters. What is the message to them? How would they, the members, those believers in the first century churches of Asia Minor, how would they have read this book? What does this book tell them? How would they have heard it? What did it mean to the original audience? And that's going to be what I'm going to try to get to in this series. So again, if this is your thing, great. If it's not, I totally understand. This is just my historical nerdiness coming out. So here's how I want to do it. I think there's kind of 3 issues that we want to come to terms with if we're going to try to understand how the original audience would have understood this book. The first one is an issue of genre, something that most modern readers of the book of Revelation don't fully understand or fully recognize or appreciate, is this is a certain genre of literature. The book of Revelation is not the only one of its kind. There are other books produced in early Judaism around the exact same time that read very similar to this. It's a style of writing within the first century Jewish world, and you have to understand the basics of how that genre of literature works if you're going to make sense of the text that's written in that genre. Right? It'd literally be like giving you a piece of fiction and telling you, here, gather current world events from this. Like, no, that's not what this writing is supposed to do. This is this kind of writing. I need this kind, right? There are different styles of writing. Poetry is not news, is not satire, although I guess some of that's kind of all blending together now. But the genre matters. So we need to understand the genre and how this works. I think that's step number 1. I think step number 2 is, what is the historical setting? Like, who are the churches of Asia Minor? What are they experiencing? And how does this message resonate with them? And then third, I think what you're going to find is that a historically focused read on the book of Revelation shows you 2 really interesting things. Number 1, this book has a lot of intertextuality with the Old Testament. This book is drawing heavily on Old Testament images, Old Testament themes, Old Testament scripture. And as you come to appreciate the Old Testament connectedness of the book of Revelation, you'll start to see what a first century reader was seeing, right? Reading it through the lens of the Old Testament. But in addition to that, of course, the other issue is, what do these particular images mean to first century readers in the Roman Empire? Not the 21st century Western world. That's a totally different setting. What did it mean to them? And those are kind of the approaches that I want to take. So in the next, what do we have? About, what time is it? About almost half hour. In the next half hour, I want to look at the first 2 of these. I want to briefly look at the issue of genre. Okay, what can we say about this style of literature that can help us to be better readers of the book of Revelation? And then number 2, I do want to at least hit a few notes of historical setting. Who are the churches of Asia Minor? What was their circumstance? And then we'll leave number 3. That will be the next 3 series, right? The next 3 classes. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights, we'll be looking at the book with those questions in mind. So let's look at the issue of genre. So as I mentioned, the book of Revelation is not the only one of its kind. The book of Revelation is a style of writing that has sisters in the early Jewish world. It's a style of writing that we call apocalyptic literature. So what is apocalyptic literature? Well, to understand the genre, I think we need to understand the word apocalypse first. That's the word after which the genre is named. So what is an apocalypse? Sometimes when we talk about apocalyptic, the book of Revelation, the apocalypse of John, sometimes we think, oh yeah, it's so symbolic because it's meant to be secret code, only unpacked by those of a certain, right? No, it's actually just the opposite. Okay, the word apocalypse, the word in Greek, apocalypsis, actually means an uncovering or an unveiling. It's showing you something that was hidden, but it's pulling back the curtain and showing you the secrets behind it. It literally is an unveiling. It's not a veiling. It's an unveiling to the believers. It's an unveiling to the faithful. It's a writing to a first century audience and saying, hey, let me pull back the curtain and let me show you something cool. That's what an apocalypsis is. That's what a revelation. Okay. And then once the curtain is pulled back and the secrets are revealed, not concealed, but revealed to the audience, they are revealed in very symbolic ways, but they're ways in which the audience can be connected to the heavenly realm and to God's work of redemption on the earth. Okay. It's meant to reveal things to the original audience, not make it so obscure and bizarre that they won't be able to figure it out until we come along 2,000 years later and say, oh, yeah, it's this thing, right? That's not how this style of literature works. So where does this style of literature come from? Why would this type of literature be produced in early Judaism? Well, I think the origins of apocalyptic literature within the Jewish community largely have to do with explanations for suffering. Why do human beings suffer? This is a really important question in Scripture. Different scriptural authors have different answers to this. Within the Pentateuch, right, meaning the law of Moses, the Torah, the predominant voice that weighs in on the question of why do humans suffer is the book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Deuteronomy, you can see this very clearly in chapters 28 through 30. There's a pretty clear model of why humans suffer. Well, if you are righteous, you're blessed. If you are not righteous, you break the covenant, you're cursed. Ergo, if you're suffering, you must have broken the covenant of some kind. It must be because you weren't righteous enough. It must be because you sinned. And are there writers in the Old Testament that see human suffering through that lens? Absolutely. The entire, what's called Deuteronomistic history, Joshua through 2 Kings, tells the entire story of ancient Israel through that lens. Hey, when they were righteous, they were blessed. They were protected. Their crops grew. They had babies. It was great. When they were not righteous, they were cursed. That's when bad things happened to them. Is that true as a concept? The answer is, I mean, maybe, sometimes. There are times when maybe that's the case. But here's the challenge with that model of suffering. Does it answer the question of human suffering in every circumstance? And here the answer is not even close. Like, that's one option that's on the table. But what happens if, what's the obvious problem here? What's the obvious issue with this interpretive approach? What happens if you're suffering and doing all the right stuff? Right? Like, what happens if you're suffering, maybe even because of your righteousness? What happens if because of your law observance, because of your Torah loyalty, because of your diligence in Jewish living, you are being persecuted? Think of the Maccabees, right? The Maccabees revolted because the Jewish community was being persecuted by the Seleucid kings because of their adherence to Torah. Well, the Deuteronomy model doesn't easily explain that one. So you need to have alternative options to explain suffering. Well, it seems to be that it's in that quest of another perspective, another possible interpretive lens for why humans suffer. That seems to be why the genre of apocalyptic literature emerges, to answer the question specifically, why do good people suffer? Why do righteous Torah observant Jews suffer? Right? It's not because they broke a commandment. Something else must be happening. Well, that then leads to the emergence of an apocalyptic worldview and a genre of apocalyptic writing. This is going to be a worldview and a genre of writing that will be very, very popular among social minority groups who are suffering because of their religious beliefs or because of their religious practices. When they see themselves as like, we are doing what God wants us to do and we're being persecuted for it, those type of social minority groups tend to resonate with an apocalyptic worldview. Why? Because an apocalyptic worldview and this type of apocalyptic literature offers a very profound message of hope. And the message of hope goes like this. The world is embroiled in a cosmic war. Good and evil have always been at war. There was a war in heaven. God and Satan, angels and demons, light and darkness, a very dualistic view of the cosmos, they have always been at war. And when the earth was created, what happened to that heavenly war? Where did it go? It came right down here to earth, and it's raging all around us. We can't always see it because angels and demons are invisible, but it's happening around us. And if good people are suffering, the explanation of this genre, of this worldview is, well, they must be suffering because they're casualties. They're caught up in a cosmic conflict. But the message of hope is that if you can see that perspective, the message of hope is, hang on, because God will win. It just, right now, it feels like the bad guys, the demonic forces are winning. And that's why the saints are suffering. That's why righteous people are being persecuted. It's a war. Hard things happen in a war. There are casualties in a war. But be assured, the message of hope of apocalypticism is that God is in control of this war, and ultimately God will win the day and overcome evil. And those who endured through the sufferings, through the difficulties, will be crowned with robes, crowned and given robes of righteousness, and so forth. So that is the emergence of a Jewish apocalypticism. The ideology, we've already kind of started this. The apocalyptic ideology is the idea of it, very dualistic. There's good versus evil. That war's been going on from the very beginning. And right now we're living in a moment of time, the worldview would say, where it seems like the bad guys are winning. It seems like the demonic forces have the edge. That's why we're suffering as a community of law-observant Jews. But God's intervention is imminent. It's going to happen any moment now. This is all part of God's plan. We know how it ends. How does it end? Well, it ends through the intervention of a messianic figure. A Messiah is going to come. God, through that messianic figure, is going to destroy the evil kingdoms of this world, who are agents of the bad guys in the cosmic war. In that process, God will establish his own kingdom. There's even going to be a final battle and the judgment of the wicked and the ultimate vindication of the righteous, sometimes even through like a resurrection or something like that. So the message is, hang on and have hope. Because even though right now it seems like the bad guys are winning, the evil forces are winning, God will win in the end. And so hang in there. Okay, that's an apocalyptic ideology. This is an ideology that was not shared by all Jews. Okay, Sadducees in the first century were not apocalyptic thinkers. Why? They were the power brokers. Those guys are the ones in power. This is a worldview that's very popular among socially marginalized groups. So who were apocalyptic thinkers in the first century? Well, the Essenes, a group who believed that most of society was apostate, and they were just waiting in the desert for all of this apocalyptic stuff to happen. Who else was apocalyptic? Well, John the Baptist and Jesus. If you read through the Gospels, carefully reading the teachings of John the Baptist or even of Jesus, let's say his final sermon, the Apocalyptic Discourse, it shares in this rhetoric. It shares in this worldview. There's a reason why Christians have historically had this perspective on life. Okay, there was probably a lot in that literature, the genre survey that we just did. They're like, yeah, that kind of all makes sense. That kind of intuitively resonates. Why? Well, early Christians were apocalypticists, and so were early Latter-day Saints. It's in our DNA. Okay, that's the worldview. Okay, and that's where it kind of comes from. So what then do we do with apocalyptic literature? Well, apocalyptic literature is the style of texts, this kind of unique genre of literature that is produced by apocalyptic thinkers who see the world this way, who understand suffering in this way, who understand the end result to play out like this. So thus, apocalyptic literature is born in the late Second Temple period. These texts, the book of Revelation is one of them. These texts are highly symbolic visions of heaven and of God's redemptive work. That kind of characterizes the genre. A lot of symbolism, a lot of animals, a lot of numbers, a lot of colors. That's just how the genre works. You read more of these texts, the more comfortable you are with the genre. You're like, okay, I get the idea. Often it takes an angelic guide to interpret. So sometimes in these texts, the visionary who's seeing the symbolic animals and numbers and stuff. Well, sorry, just did kind of a Johnny Depp thing. Jack Sparrow on the show. Anyway, I'm sorry, it's getting late. I'm obviously getting punchy. While they're having an angelic guide who'll say, oh, this represents that, or this represents that. It's a revelation of divine mysteries, and it's prophetic social critique. A lot of times in this apocalyptic literature, through the symbolic animals or symbolic numbers or symbolic colors, it is giving prophetic critique of current institutions, current economic or military institutions that the author sees as being part of the war, part of the bad guys. And ultimately, it's a message of hope that God will prevail. God will win in the end. That's how the literature works. And these texts are kind of everywhere. I mean, the Dead Sea Scrolls have several apocalyptic texts. The coming war of the sons of light versus the sons of darkness. Here's how it's going to play out. First Enoch is an apocalypse. Second Baruch, fourth Ezra, the apocalypse of Abraham are apocalyptic texts written by Jews in the late Second Temple period who are socially marginalized, socially persecuted, and this is how they find hope that in the end, God will win, that their community will be vindicated. Now, I'm just looking at the time. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do what I wanted to do next. I wanted to actually give you an example of a biblical apocalypse because we start to see this genre, this style of literature already in the Old Testament. The most important example of a biblical apocalypse, meaning a genre text written in this style, is Daniel 7, right? What's Daniel 7? Well, the very short version is, if I did the whole book of Revelation in 90 seconds, I can do Daniel 7 in 30 seconds. This 30-second version is Daniel sees a vision of 4 fierce-looking beasts coming out of an ocean, right? He's terrified. The 4th beast is devouring the saints. And in this wildly symbolic vision of these beasts emerging from the ocean, devouring the saints. They have horns and all sorts of crazy stuff. Daniel cries out to God, when are you going to intervene? Are you going to stop this? Your people are dying at the hands, or at the mouth, at the claws of these beasts. In response, Daniel sees a vision of God on his throne, surrounded by numerous concourses of angels shouting praises. He sees the heavenly throne room, and he sees God sending messianic deliverance through the figure. Oh, sorry, I should have kept going there. Through the figure of the Son of Man, coming on the clouds of glory to destroy the beasts, to judge the wicked, and save the righteous who have endured in faithful discipleship. That is Daniel 7, 30-second version, right? Go back and read it. That is a biblical apocalypse that has all of the characteristics of the genre as we just described it. Symbolic depictions of good guys versus bad guys, beasts versus the Son of Man. God, watching his people being devoured by the beast, but then sending intervention with the messianic figure who saves them. This is where the term Son of Man comes from. When Jesus refers to himself as Son of Man, he's using an apocalyptic image from Daniel 7. He's saying, I'm that guy. So yes, there are biblical examples of these apocalyptic texts. Daniel 7, and frankly, Daniel 8 through 12 are also other versions of apocalyptic texts. So with that in mind, I hope this has been helpful. We've looked at 2 things so far. We've looked at different interpretive approaches to the book of Revelation, which has been fun. And now we've looked at the genre of Jewish apocalyptic literature. And I hope that you're already starting to sense you can read the book of Revelation. You understand the genre, you're like halfway there. Right? You're so far down the road to actual comprehension. Now, it takes away a lot of the weirdness and a lot of the anxiety and so forth. And you're like, okay, I can do this. Beasts represent bad guys, right? Angels represent the good. I mean, I'm starting to see the image take shape. With that in mind, we now have 10 minutes left, if I'm reading the schedule correctly. Now let's look at the book itself, the book of Revelation. Now that you know that it's part of this genre that you can read as a genre, I can help you to navigate the kind of the seeming bizarre weirdness of the book. Let's finally put the last piece in place and say, so what is the historical setting? With genre in mind, what's actually going on with this audience? Like, why would this author speak to that first century audience and use the apocalyptic genre of literature to do it? And what's going on there? Well, here are a few observations we can make just to get us, again, oriented. We'll do the real heavy lifting starting tomorrow, where we read Revelation 1 through 22 together. Like, we'll literally read Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday together. But for now, let's just get a few historical setting details in place. Number 1, the date. When was this thing written? The answer is, we don't know for sure, actually. There are 2 kind of predominant options. One is that the book could have been written quite early, maybe even as early as the 60s AD. That is going to be possible if you think the Jerusalem temple is still standing. As you read the book of Revelation, the references to the Jerusalem temple, if you think the temple is still standing when this book is being written, it must be written before 70, when the temple is destroyed. So some scholars suggest the book might be written in the 60s. If, however, as you read the book, you're like, yeah, I don't think the temple is still standing, then the more likely political context is probably dated to the 90s. The reality is we don't know. It's sometime between the late mid to late 1st century is when this book seems to be written. Who wrote it? The author identifies himself simply as John the Seer or John the Revelator. We don't have time to get into debates. Is that the John of the Gospels? That's a very complex conversation. Sorry, we shouldn't have time for it. You can do an internet rabbit hole on your own. The location, the author says in chapter 1, he is writing this from a small island off the Asia Minor coast called Patmos. And his audience, he is very clear. Okay, chapter 1 and 2 and 3 could not be more clear. John writing to those who are of the 7 churches of Asia Minor, and then he lists them. And we can actually plot them on a map. We know exactly where these 7 cities are. They're all in Asia Minor, and they're all on the Roman road network that we talked about in the last hour. The Pax Romana connected all of these cities by an extensive road network, and these 7 churches are all on the road. I can't really do the pointer here, but if you look on the map, you can see the Isle of Patmos, kind of off the coast. That's where the book is written from. And it's being sent to the 7 churches of, and you can go kind of along it, Pergamum, Thyatira, Philadelphia, Laodicea, Sardis, Smyrna, and Ephesus. You can imagine that this book is being written as a letter sent from the island of Patmos, first to Ephesus, and then from Ephesus being just traveled along the road, delivered to the communities in these 7 cities. We know exactly where these 7 cities are, and we know where the island of Patmos are. So these are not mysteries, right? We can do this. We can understand these historical settings. There's the island of Patmos, by the way, very small, kind of horseshoe-shaped island. Really cool place if you can get there. Okay, so that's the background. That's at least a little bit of the historical setting. We know who the audience is. That's a really important start. What's the circumstance? Well, in the final few minutes, let's take a look at the circumstances behind this book. If you read the book of Revelation very carefully, with an eye towards what circumstance is being addressed, to an extent, you can kind of reverse engineer the circumstance. Okay, and here's how the circumstance seems to go. Kind of here are 3 main observations. Number 1, it does seem clear from the writings itself that John the Revelator is writing to a group of house churches on the Roman road in Asia Minor, to these 7 communities in these 7 cities, communities of believers in Asia Minor who are experiencing some kind of persecution. He says this outright. He says, I know you are being persecuted for the faith. And they're also experiencing some kind of social marginalization, something about their pursuit to live as Christians in the Greek cities of Ephesus, Smyrna, Sardis, Pergamum, Thyatira, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Something about that is providing social dislocation. Their former friends, their former neighbors, their family members are somehow marginalizing them because of their Christianity, because of their faith in Jesus, because of their refusal to live in certain ways that are traditional in the Greco-Roman world. So between some kind of persecution locally and some kind of local social marginalization by local Romans, or maybe even by local Jewish synagogue congregations, there's a few hints in the book of Revelation that some of the social dislocation is at the expense, or at the hand of fellow Jews. Number 2 is it seems like some in the community are being pressured to participate in Roman institutions. There's official pressure to participate in things like the local festivals, sacrifices to local deities, maybe even sacrifices to the Roman emperor. Asia Minor is known in the mid to late 1st century as being one of the areas that is most interested in emperor worship, meaning literally putting up shrines to living Roman emperors and offering sacrifices and oblations to the living emperor as a deity. And that these were local expectations, civic duties to show our loyalty, to show our place in the Roman world. But some of you aren't doing it. You Christians aren't doing it. And so there seems to be some social pressure or even persecution, some pressure for participate in these local forms of Roman worship, maybe even the imperial cult. And then finally, it does seem from this author's perspective that some in the community are actually kind of giving into these pressures, maybe even loosening up their Christianity a little bit, so that they could fit into Roman society. Maybe they're being a little too accommodating of Roman lifestyle practices, maybe even Roman religious practices. And this author is concerned about all 3 of these things: persecution, social marginalization, pressures to be to integrate into the Roman world, and maybe even accommodating Roman lifestyles in a way that this author does not approve of, and thinks that Christians should be better than that, should avoid that, should endure in faithful discipleship in that particular setting. So if that's the circumstance, that definitely seems to be the case, what is the message of this book? Well, the message is the author sees the Roman Empire as Babylon. By using these kind of the beast images from Daniel, actually, you know how that fourth beast was a really nasty beast that was devouring the saints? This author takes that fourth beast of Daniel and basically says, yeah, that's the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is Babylon. The Roman Empire is the prostitute who rides the dragon, the whore who sits on the 7 hills. That's not a very coded message. You don't have to be a very literate Roman to say, wait, 7 hills? Oh, that's Rome. That's Rome. right? The 666, the Antichrist, that is the Roman emperor. This author, by using this apocalyptic genre, these animal symbols and color and number symbols, actually couldn't be more clear, right? Rome is the bad guy. Rome is the evil agent who's currently dominating this world and persecuting the saints. So don't give into it. Hang in there. Endure in faithful discipleship. So number 1, endure your persecutions. Endure your social marginalizations. Number 2, be separate from Rome. Don't participate in it. Don't engage in emperor worship. Mark of the beast that you can't buy or sell unless you. That's engagement in the Roman economy. Don't do that. Be separate. And the message of hope is that if you do, you know what? The Roman Empire is not going to last forever. One day God's going to intervene. And if you endure in faithful discipleship, you will be exalted. You will be the kings and priests that were promised to Israel at Mount Sinai. You'll be crowned with gold, have robes of righteousness. You'll be given a new name. You'll be integrated into the new temple that will descend from on high, the heavenly Jerusalem. Okay, these are all going to be images that we'll see resonating with a first century reader in that circumstance here in the next few days. And in the process of using this apocalyptic genre, the animals, the beasts, the numbers, etc., this author is offering a very clear prophetic critique of Roman society. This author is not a fan of Rome. When other books of the New Testament say, hey, honor the Roman governor, this author is like, nope, because that Roman governor is the Antichrist, right? It's the beast. This author is offering a very strong prophetic critique of Roman society, a prophetic critique of Roman conquest. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, that's a sham. That only came because of violence and conquest and military occupation. That's not something God does. That's something that Babylon does. Roman economy. This Roman world, forces you to engage in things that are offensive to God. Don't do it, no matter how big the social pressure. Roman hubris. They really think they're gods. They're not. And then Roman blasphemy. So this message of this book has very clear things to say to a first century group of Christians suffering persecutions, social marginalization, and even maybe social accommodations if they're slipping in a way that this author is trying to help correct. The final things I'll say, just 2 more slides, if you'll give me 1 more minute, is so how does the author do this? If that's the message, well, the author does it through writing an apocalypse, through writing this genre of text that basically has an opening vision. Next time, so on Wednesday, tomorrow, we're going to look at the introduction of the book. We're going to look at the opening vision of the book, the man among the candlesticks, a cool revelation of Jesus Christ. And we're also going to look at the letter, specifically, not to us, but to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, about their specific circumstances in the Roman world. Then on Thursday, we're going to look at a wildly symbolic view of the heavenly throne room and the book with the 7 seals. And we're going to see how those images would have sounded to a first century audience in the Roman world. And then on Friday, we'll conclude with the magnificent finale of the book, this heavenly warfare between good and evil that will culminate in a new creation where the righteous are exalted and live in the heavenly city, the new Jerusalem, where all tears are wiped away from all eyes. It is the ultimate message of hope. So that is what I mean when I'm saying I want to look at the book of Revelation in its historical context. And I hope that today's opening lecture, this introductory lecture, provides a sense of different interpretations, the genre of this style of literature, the historical setting, so that starting tomorrow, we can look at these various segments of the book and how they engage with the Old Testament, how they're significant in a first century world, how they revealed Jesus to these original readers, and how this book was a message of hope for the saints of the first century. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night tonight, and we will see you next time.